What is it that makes shows like Cyberpunk, Edge Runners, League of Legends Arcane, and now most recently the Amazon Fallout TV show work so well? Obviously they have a very loving attention to detail, and obviously they really know the source material, and obviously they really care about the source material as well, and obviously they know it well enough to be able to emulate and in some instances really enhance the themes and feelings and moods and aesthetic of a certain game. Now, obviously this has been done to various degrees, but right now we are fortunate enough to be in an era where there is enough good adaptations of video games that we can really start looking at it and seeing what all of them have in common. So that way future creators can make sure that if they're adapting things from one medium to another, they know what those key elements are that allow you to stay true to whatever universe that you want to be in, while still being able to tell your own original stories. Today we're going to talk about diegetic references in media, but more specifically we're going to talk about diegetic references in video game adaptations. We're mainly going to focus on the new Fallout TV show, but I might include some clips from Cyberpunk and League of Legends Arcane. While I'm not going to be going into heavy spoilers, I will be talking about how the last two episodes really encapsulate why film adaptations are something that people still strive for, despite the fact that video games are kind of the superior medium. So I guess you can kind of say spoilers, but I mean not really. So before we explain how diegesis works, we have to explain how diegesis is. Diegesis is a term that comes from the Greek for to narrate. The term often describes fiction storytelling and represents the quote-unquote world in which the story takes place. Diegesis is the interior view of the fictional world in which a character resides. Executions of this concept include, but aren't limited to, details about the world itself, and the experiences of its characters are revealed explicitly through narrative. The story is told or recounted as opposed to shown or enacted. There is presumed detachment from the story of both the speaker and the audience. Diegesis is multi-leveled in narrative fiction. Gerard Genet distinguishes between three diegetic levels. The extra diegetic level, the level of the narrative's telling, is external to, not part of, any diegesis. One might think of this as what we commonly understand to be the narrator's level, the level at which exists a narrator who is not part of the story being told. The diegetic level, or intra-diegetic level, is understood as a level of the characters, their thoughts, and actions. And the meta-diegetic level, or hypodiegetic level, is a part of a diegesis that is embedded in another one and is often understood as a story within a story, as when diegetic narrators themselves tell a story. This is a little bit different in the world of video games. In video games, diegesis comprises of the narrative game world, its characters, objects, and actions. This is normally classified as intradiegetic by both being part of the narration and not breaking the fourth wall. Things like menus, status indicators, and inventories, basically any UI which are not part of the game world itself, can be considered extra-diegetic. Entities existing in the game world do not know about them, even though the players are relying on it for real-time information. Much of this design philosophy is touched on at a GDC 2013 panel where developer Dino Ignacio, lead UI designer at Visceral Games, explained Dead Space's design philosophy and chronicled its evolution during its series. Also, apologies if I pronounced any of that stuff wrong. I'm trying to one-take this mother, so we're going. In the Dead Space series, the player character is equipped with an advanced survival suit that projects holographic images to the character within the game's rendering engine. This also serves as the game's user interface to the player to show things like weapon selection, inventory management, and what special actions can be taken. When a player invokes the user interface in a Dead Space game, it appears within the game's world. The holographic projection of Isaac Clarke's supplies appears to the user on the other side of the TV or monitor, just like it would to Clarke within the game's world. To quote Dino, Dead Space was conceived to be an immersive, story-driven science fiction experience. We were not just diegetic by design, we were diegetic by implementation. And as a broader example of this diegetic design, he specifically called out the infamous eye poke scene in Dead Space 2, in which a laser, which is pointed straight at Isaac's eye, is both the cursor and reticle for the player and an actual physical object within the game's world. The developers also use a color language to convey information to players without having to blatantly convey it. Blue and white objects are interactive, red means something is locked or not interactive at the moment, and orange and amber means that it's just ambient, something that's just there to make the rooms look pretty, according to Dino. As a side note, as someone who's been a gamer for over 20 years, the whole yellow paint thing that people were complaining about a while ago, that's completely stupid. That has been a part of gaming for the longest time. That was part of the color theory in like the original Half-Life. So Stop complaining. Stop complaining. Very similarly to the retro-futuristic aesthetic of Fallout, Visceral Games used skeuomorphic design elements to foster a sense of familiarity in the futuristic environment. The principle of skeuomorphic design is to mirror objects in the real world. The most common example of this philosophy is the iOS Notes app, which is made to replicate your traditional legal pad. Gaming is a medium that combines all three levels of diegesis, and not only does it have to juggle it, it has to balance all of them unless done so intentionally for the sake of whatever story it's trying to tell. So one could almost argue that adapting a game to screen would in many ways be a step back. But I mean, there's a reason why The Quiet Place worked and The Quiet Man didn't.
The game has so much flexibility. They're so big, they're so epic, there's so many choices you can make, and you're removing a lot of that openness with the series, but the series can do things like flashbacks that are a little more challenging with the game. So that world before the war, which is so distinct, so satirical, so it's so much of the flavor of these games, and the ability to play in that, I think was incredibly exciting to us.
Diegesis in film typically refers to the internal world that is created by the story that the characters themselves experience and encounter. The narrative space that includes all of the parts of the story, both those that are and those that are not actually shown on screen. So think of events that have led up to the present action, people who are being talked about, or events that have presumed to have already happened elsewhere or at a different time. Also, elements of a film can be diegetic or non-diegetic in nature. These terms are most commonly used in reference to the sounds of the film. Most soundtrack music in films is non-diegetic, which just means it's heard by the audience but not by the characters, but some films have really played into this convention. For example, Baby Driver, which a lot of the soundtrack of the film is listened to by the titular Baby Driver. These terms can also be applied for other elements such as titles, subtitles, and even voiceover narration, which are all considered non-diegetic within the filmmaking world.
I think that the part that was the most exciting but also the most nervous-making were all of the flashbacks. And it was something that as we were talking about it, and Geneva and Graham were getting more and more excited about telling that story about what happened before the war, what precipitated the war, one little sliver of that larger story and a little bit more of an insight in Vault-Tec.
I think one of the really smart things about this direction in storytelling is that it allows them to not only build upon pre-established lore, but it gives them a chance to really kind of carve out their own little section as well to add to the lore as it is. Allowing them to focus more on the pre-war allows them to really leave their mark without having to worry about messing with the canon. Shady Sands notwithstanding. And I mean, while we're thinking about it, let's hear it from Mr. Todd himself.
Graham and Geneva wanted to blow up Shady Sands. The first thing they bring that up, you're like, what do you want to do? I had actually an emotional reaction to it given the history of that location in the franchise from Fallout 1, and we talked through it, and this will be a pretty impactful story moment that a lot of things anchor on. So making that work, and just so people hear it, I know are watching this, we're careful about the timeline. There might be a little bit of confusion in some places, but everything that happened in the previous games, including New Vegas, happened. We're very careful about that. And so when they brought that up, threading that needle to make sure that was a moment that landed in the show that also move things forward in terms of what's going to be happening in the world of Fallout. That was a big one that we talked about.
But was that just like, are people just misunderstanding what the fall of Shady Sands means, or like anything like that?
All I could say is like, we're threading it tight there, but the bomb falls just after the events of New Vegas. Like that's when Shady Sands.
So basically, the fall of Shady Sands. Yeah, it doesn't mean a nuke necessarily.
Correct.
I'm glad we got that out of the way. It was a big question.
To piggyback off that, the creators of the show were smart and respectful enough to think about the scope of the show and their ambitions compared to something like the MCU and the DCEU, which seems like it's just cranking out content just for the sake of having.
From our end, we had seen the care with which Todd and the team at Bethesda had made sure that all of these games connect together. Everyone who worked on Fallout, all the games, were so respectful and so careful to keep this consistent universe. If we got a different direction, the show would be the only thing that doesn't fit with that universe. Now, obviously, there's challenges there. These are open world games, and games will all have different endings, different outcomes, and you have to find a way to honor those. But we didn't want to be in our own little private corner of an Elseworld or a different universe. That felt like, I think that would be less meaningful to me watching the series, to know that it was completely divorced from the reality of the games.
He then went on to reaffirm,
I think it's definitely more of an asset. It is a challenge. I mean, as Todd said, it'd be much easier for us to just kind of like a bull in a china shop, just go in here and pick whatever we wanted. And okay, I've worked on adaptations before where they're defined by the degrees of difference from the source material, where you're adapting a book, when you're adapting, for instance, Westworld, the original brilliant film by Michael Crichton. I mean, of respecting all of the lore, respecting all the great storytelling that's come before you, and trying to find a way to not only play nicely with that, but also add to it if you can. So, like I said, just a dream collaboration.
So yeah, I think when they were making this show, they completely had diegesis in mind in regards to making it feel authentic. Like, for those of you who are film nerds like me, they filmed this on Kodak film. I know it's been making a bit of a resurgence lately, and I can't find any specific articles about it, but I do remember seeing some conversation about it being filmed on Kodak film, which ironically enough has its own ties and history to the original atomic bomb. For people like me who overanalyze things, that is insanely cool. And I think one of the main draws that people still talk about adaptations and fan casting and things like that is the fact that with video games, you're in control of the world to various but not insignificant degrees. But in a TV show or a book or a movie or even music, you're just there along for the ride, and it forces you to just take in everything as it happens and to just kind of ruminate on it. This show does a great job showing how miserable the world was leading up to and after the bombs falling. Like, that's one of the things that I feel like is very easy for us to detach ourselves from while playing the game, is the realities of this world and trying to live in it and grow and have a family in it, which I think this show did a lot better than any of the games ever could. The singular pharmacy that ends up being used by different characters during different points of time during the story is not only a very smart way to do filmmaking, but it does a really good job of showing you how the world itself is a part of the story. Having a centralized location like that be a place where different characters cross paths or interact or just do things is a type of storytelling that you can't do as easily in a game. You can do it through cutscenes, but I mean, let's be honest, it's not going to have quite the same impact. The tonal whiplash of this show is just amazing. You can tell that they were taking notes from The Boys, but I think what really just cranks it up to a more grandiose and absurd level is having people like Fred Armisen and Chris Parnell as these side characters, because they are just so good at doing these completely straight yet ridiculous characters. Like, Dr. Spachemin survived the apocalypse, but I mean, that doesn't surprise me at all. And as I said at the beginning of this video, the final 2 episodes show why a medium like TV and film are still trying to be emulated and replicated by video games. There's things like the corporate meeting, which was just such a blatant reference to Doctor Strangelove, the build up to the famous quote of war never changing, and watching the Brotherhood of Steel being given access to cold fusion and knowing that they're either going to go completely dictator with it or they're just going to destroy it and keep themselves in this dark age. And then you top the whole thing off with the New Vegas reveal, which once again, why are people still complaining about Shady Sands when New Vegas is right there? Stop complaining. But I feel like by episodes 8 and 9, the show built up so much trust that it allowed me to just kind of get lost in the story being told. It was a pretty damn good Sanderlands for those who know what that term means. So when they started doing the final reveals and conclusions and bringing back references like NCR or Dogmeat, you're suddenly reminded that you are watching an adaptation of a video game. It's the same reason why I love Warhammer and Star Wars so much, because they provide this amazing sandbox where you can have life and world-changing events, but at the end of the day, they're still just a tiny blip in something that is bigger than all of us. And things like Arcane and Edge Runners and Fallout allows the fictional universe that was created to literally experience itself, like that Bill Hicks joke. I think that as someone who considers themselves an artist and a creator, the ability and the opportunity to not only tell a story in a fictional universe, but given the chance to expand its lore, at least for me, that's something I wouldn't take lightly, and I'm glad that the creators behind Fallout didn't take it very lightly either. And I hope that going forward, as more of these adaptations become common, people will remember that it's not just the name drops, it's not just the plot beats or anything like that, it is always the little stuff. It is the little props. It is just the sound effects. It is just the overall aesthetic and vibe and mood of whatever it is you're trying to portray. Alright, I didn't feel like setting up my green screen and all that stuff, so you can have this to kind of entertain you while I finish up here. Yeah, I think that there's a lot that we can really extrapolate from Fallout in regards to what makes a good adaptation click so well. I don't think you necessarily have to be the biggest fan of whatever it is that you're adapting, but at the very least, you do need to understand the soul of that thing. You need to understand the world. You need to understand kind of the ethos of that universe. And I think that was why Game of Thrones worked so well up until, you know, the last couple seasons, was because of the fact that they really nailed that grim, dark vibe. It really nailed that whole feeling of anyone's expendable. And I mean, Game of Thrones, the game, the Telltale games, tried to emulate something similar, and it just wasn't as successful. So yeah, let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know what you think about Fallout, any of the other ones I mentioned, Cyberpunk or Arcane. Actually, you know what? Talking about Game of Thrones between the book, the TV show, and even the video game, that's a pretty interesting one to dissect as well. Maybe I'll look into that sometime. But along with that, anything else that you might be interested in me talking about, let me know. I am so close to 500 subscribers, and then I can start begging YouTube for money. So if you want to help make me a part of that machine, go ahead and smash the subscribe button, click the like button, everything that you have to do to please the Omnissiah, you know, the big guy up there. Big E. So yeah, let me know what you think. And I have like the next 3 videos already outlined and stuff like that. I'm hoping I can actually kind of get ahead of schedule so I can start doing a couple longer things, but it feels good to get something shorter out of the gate. And you know what, if you want me to do shorter videos, hit the like button. All right, always be plugging, as Jarvis would say.